Welcome to NDY's International Women's Day panel discussion exploring how we can collectively break the bias. I'll introduce the panelists to you shortly. This is an international event and the discussion will cross live between venues in Auckland, Melbourne, Perth and Sydney. And we're also streaming live to our online audience. Each year, Norman Disney and Young marks International Women's Day as a celebration of our commitment to gender equality. NDY is committed to challenging and calling out gender bias, discrimination, and stereotyping alongside developing inclusive behaviors. We all have a role to play in achieving gender parity, so we proactively break the bias in order to encourage change. I would like to now hand you over to Stuart Fowler, President of Tetra Tech High Performance Building Division and CEO of Norman Disney and Young. Over to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Renee, and welcome everyone, both in person in our 4 venues, Melbourne, Sydney, Perth and Auckland, and also virtually to audience across other countries around the world. I'd like to commence today's International Women's Day event by acknowledging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters that we now call Australia, where we work and live. Specifically, I'd like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I stand here today. NDY pays respects to elders past, present and emerging. NDY also has offices in New Zealand, in both Auckland and Wellington, and our Auckland fraternity is joining us today. So within the Wellington region, the native iwi are the Te Ati Awa and Ngāti Toa. And in the Auckland region, the native iwi are the Ngāti Watua and the Tainui. NDY acknowledges these iwi and thanks all Maori people of New Zealand for allowing us to live and work within their domain. So thank you for attending NDY's International Women's Day event for 2022 and welcome. And a very special welcome to our panellists today, to Kylie Mooney, to Sandra Brewer, to Jen Marks here in Melbourne, to Janet Manzi, in Sydney, and to our own Liana Paolino, in Sydney also. And I must say a thank you to Renee for stepping in at short notice to act as our MC as well. So thanks, Renee. The United Nations theme for International Women's Day this year, as you've heard, is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, recognising the contribution of women and girls around the world who are leading the charge on climate change response to build a more sustainable future for us all. The theme strongly aligns with NDY's focus on sustainability in design and with our commitment to gender equality and improving the representation of women in our industry. We know that gender equality is a key driver for our business success. Improving gender equality improves our business performance, it ensures future sustainability, innovation and growth as a business. It enhances our reputation as an employer of choice to be able to attract, retain and engage a diverse and high-performing team. And it contributes positively through our business to our society and to our communities more broadly. And a second underlying theme for International Women's Day this year is also Break the Bias. This aligns with our goals to create an inclusive culture, removing barriers to ensure all of our people have the same choices, opportunities and options available to them. NDY recognises the need to address the gender gap. We understand that the gender pay gap is a product of having too few women in senior leadership roles. By achieving gender balance in leadership roles and organisation-wide, NDY will be helping to bridge the gender pay gap within our industry as well. So I'm proud that our continued efforts have seen NDY recognised, as one of only 136 organisations across Australia at the moment by the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, WGEA, as an employer of choice for gender equality in Australia. And for us, that's been since 2018. We reapplied for citation again in late 2021 for the coming 2 years, and we're looking forward reasonably confidently for the announcements of in relation to citation holders that will be made later this month, mid-March. NDY is also working with other Tetra Tech units, particularly those in the High Performance Buildings Division, learning and sharing experiences to achieve better outcomes for people across the board, particularly for our women. Our efforts to improve gender equality, both at NDY and across communities in which we operate, will continue. And today, I think, is just a great example of that. So I'm very grateful for everyone's attendance today in each of our venues. And with that, I'll hand back to Renee now and move to the panel discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Stuart. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists to you. I'll introduce them to you one by one, and then I'll ask each of them to tell us a little bit more about themselves before we go on to the panelist discussion. First off, Kylie Mooney, Chief Executive Officer at Meredith, Connell. Over to you, Kylie.
Yes, I've been the CEO at Meredith Connell for approximately 5 years, and prior to that, the COO. I've been at MC now for about 15 years. In Meredith Connell, for those of you watching who don't know our organisation, we're a law firm. So just to give some context to the discussion as we have it further on.
Thank you, Kylie. And now for Sandra Brever, WA Executive Director at the Property Council of Australia.
Okay, thank you very much. It's nice to be here in the same room as you, Renee. So I am the Executive Director of the Property Council in Western Australia. The Property Council is the peak advocacy group for the many people who work in property, construction, funds management, agencies, leasing, and generally in the total management and ownership and operation of buildings.
Thank you, Sandra. Next up, Janet Manzi, Country Manager at Amazon Australia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janet. I've been at Amazon for about a year. We're an online retailer, and I hope you shop from us. And if you don't, I'd love to hear why. Prior to being at Amazon, I was with Cochlear, which is a hearing implant company. I'm Australian. I sound like I'm from Seattle, but I'm not. I'm Canadian and have been here for about 14 years. So really excited about the discussion here. So thanks for inviting me here today.
Thank you, Janet. NDY's Liana Paolino, NDY Senior Associate. Over to you, Liana.
Hi, everyone. My name's Liana. I've been with the organisation for 8 years now. I started as a graduate all that time ago. And look, I'm here today, I guess, representing a really fantastic group of women that we have in our organisation. And I'm really privileged to be alongside these incredible women on this panel today. Looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Liana. And last panelist, Jen Marks, Director of Strategy at Built.
Hi everyone, I'm Jen Marks and I've been at Built for 10 years, in the construction industry for 25, so I call myself a construction lifer. And I thought about, you know, the rewarding aspects of our career when I first joined, and it's still the same today. It's the variety of people that we get to work with, and that real opportunity to really make a difference and contribute to society with the Built form.
Great, thank you, Jen. We aim to leave you with some key insights on the progress other organisations and industries have made towards gender equality, and answers to the important question, how can the engineering and the construction sector learn from this progress? We'll start the questions next. I'd like to hear from all of the panelists on the first question. We'll start with you, Kylie. This year's International Women's Day theme is Breaking the Bias, which asks us to actively call out gender bias, discrimination, and stereotyping each time we see it. What does that mean to you, and what tangible actions can we collectively take to stop gender bias?
I think for our organisation, a big thing is actually understanding what it is that you're actually dealing with. So back in 2018 and even prior to that, we got some numbers on our current position of women in leadership roles, and more importantly, then subsequently set some targets for that. So in 2018, we had about 30% of our partners were women. Our board set a very clear target for 40% of women in partnership by 2021 and 50% 2023. We published those targets very openly, and to some frustration from some of our male staff members thinking that we were going to favour women. But I genuinely think having those targets and changing the conversation actually shed a light on it and meant we started actively doing things that would address it. And probably for us, the most significant one was shoulder tapping women who we thought should move into senior roles. Our experience was that we never really had to ask any of our male lawyers to put their hand up for partnership. They were usually all coming and approaching us saying, I'm next, give me, I've got the case. And the women would sit back waiting for it. And so we went to a number of our really outstanding female lawyers and said, we think you're next, or we think you're there in a couple of years, and what can we do to help you get there, and what do you need from us? And that really helped change the language. Another thing we did do was unconscious bias training for all staff. I know that has some question marks on it around it at the moment, but the advantage for us was that everyone did it, and so it changed some of the language that we had, and it meant we could call out behaviours. So we would sit in a room going, hang on a minute, are you only interested in that person because they're like you? Or we actually allowed each other to challenge some of the decisions being made. And it's not just in recruitment, it's about who you choose to mentor or sponsor or delegate work to even. So that became important. And the last thing we did was we made sure all of our partners were asked to sponsor a female member of staff. And I say that sponsorship is quite distinct from mentorship, because sponsorship's more about someone who's advocating for that person in their career and constantly putting them forward and saying, I believe in them, they're the next person. So there's some of the activities we've done. I'm actually really thrilled to say we hit our 40% target a year early. We've currently got 45% women in partnership now, so we're well on our way to hitting our 50% in 2023. And actually, where we were once middle of the pack for the law firms in New Zealand, we're actually now leading the pack for women. And so there's about 3 law firms that are probably around the 45 to 50% mark. So we've made some good headway, and we're pretty proud of that.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, Kylie. I think the distinguishment you've made between sponsorship and mentorship is an important one, and it would be great to see that across the board more. Maybe next we'll hear from you, Sandra.
Thank you. So the Property Council
has been on a journey for a number of years now, and we do that in the spirit of representing the leadership and the management of the property industry. So we're made up of member organisations, and leading executives comprise our board. And around 2015, the board decided to really challenge the gender inequality that was in the property industry, and that is in terms of participation. I think only around 24% of people in the property industry were women, and that was felt to be holding the industry back. And you can imagine at levels of senior management, it was very much a male-dominated environment. So it needed a new effort to really move the dial. So the Property Male Champions of Change was formed. At that stage, it was about men and male leading executives of companies taking responsibility for change. That's now evolved to become the Champions of Change, and senior executive women are also involved in being literally champions for gender diversity in those organisations. So those 24 companies, they represent around 30,000 people across the property industry. And through dedicated programs and initiatives, they've been able to get very good results. So they went from around 40% of senior leadership, management and executive roles being held by women, to now 70% of those leadership roles having gender balance. Of course, it's not 70% women in those roles, it's that they're gender balanced across 70% of those categories of leadership. The Property Council has a unique role to play, because we hold all of the events, all of the committees and all of the work that the property industry does together to advocate to the community or to government. And through initiatives that the Property Council has done, which is a commitment to 40-40-20 across all of our committees and all of our panel speakers at events, we've really changed the face of gender diversity in the industry. to the extent now that I think people are surprised to see an all-male panel. And it's been a great achievement to see across 2,500 committee members Australia-wide. We now have 44% women on those committees. So we're still on the journey, but there's been really good initiatives that have made measurable results.
That's great to hear, Sandra. Thank you for sharing that. Next, we'll go to Janet to hear her perception.
Oh, look, I have to say, those are two amazing stories, right? And I have to say, I had a bit to do with the Property Council because I had a role before working with the Champions of Change Coalition. I actually still do. But one of the things I think you're hearing about is this whole notion of like crystallizing intent, which takes a lot of courage, right? Like setting targets, being clear about what you want to do, and then like any other business process, like measuring how you're doing and then innovating to fix the defects you see in a process. At Amazon, we talk a lot about defects, right? People here would understand that, where you have a goal and you have a clear intention, and whatever's occurring is not meeting your expectations. And I think that gender equality is a great place to look for defects, like what's wrong with the system that's leading to those outcomes. So I have to say, I feel really inspired by both of those stories. I think another thing I would just add to the mix, and this is more something, an experiment that I took individually that we shouldn't forget about, is I have kids, and I imagine some of you do too. You probably have more gray hair than you might have otherwise. But one of the things I observed is that at the school, at my kids' school, there's room parents, right? And those room parents are like, we're always women. Right? Always women. And, I thought, gosh, that's interesting, right? So, there's lots of good reasons you could say, but, you're really getting the best representation, are you getting the best outcomes? Probably not. And also, what does it say to your kids, especially my girls, who look and say, well, actually, I guess dads don't help out at school. And so one of the things that I did, and my friends all thought I was crazy, is I almost staged a takeover of the year parents group, and I tapped a couple of men on the shoulder and I said, hey, can you come along with me? And I got them to commit to 2 years, and then they had to find their own replacement. And I got to tell you, it was super hard to keep that going, and so I guess I just want to put that out there as kind of another part of the coin, right? That part of this is about getting men to step up in spheres of influence that traditionally are women dominated, because of course, if you're not expected to be a room parent as a woman, it's actually pretty awesome, right? Because you free up a bunch of your time. And so I think when you're able to also create safe space for men to be in women-occupied spaces, you can also end up with some great results as well. So I hope that adds another lens. It's also, by the way, a very practical action many of us can take that's perhaps not as huge as taking on bigger systemic change.
Thank you for sharing, Janet. I think that's really great. We need to look at how this can be applied across the board, and that was a really good example. And as a mom of two, I really could connect with that as well. Liana, can you maybe go next, please? Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, when I think about breaking the bias, I think about evening the playing field, right? So it's about taking away, all the judgment and the misconceptions and maybe all the extra hurdles that a woman might need to go through, to get to that same level as her male counterpart. And I think a lot of great points have been raised here today around some of the opportunities to try to improve those opportunities for women so that they do have so that we are, evening the playing field, that we're all held to the same standard and then we have the same opportunities to succeed. Because at the end of the day, I guess the vision is that we have the right people in the right roles because of their skills, because of their experience, and because of their potential. And it shouldn't be a question about gender. So it's about kind of taking that gender conversation out. And I totally acknowledge that at the moment, the numbers and the facts, they're important because numbers show issues and numbers show progress. So it's very important to focus on that. But I think sometimes we can focus too much on numbers, trying to create all the pretty pie charts and the percentages, and take away from the focus of what it is. It's really just about that vision of having the right people doing the right things because of their skill set.
I couldn't agree more, Liana. Thank you for sharing that. Jen, lastly, would like to hear from you on this topic.
Yeah. So break the bias. I guess first of all, you need to acknowledge that everyone has biases, and it's. I think we need to. I'm not sure if it's the same in every industry, but definitely in the construction industry, it's kind of created a label of being bad or something wrong to have biases. We all have them. And like men and women, everyone in fact have particular biases because it's based on your life experience, and some of it's for survival's sake, and some of it's just basic experience and things that you don't challenge that are just a given in your upbringing, whatever that experience might be. And so for me, really breaking the bias is really more about being generous and allowing people to have bias and helping them acknowledge it and become aware of it, because until we've raised that awareness of what bias is, there's really nothing we can do about it. And I've seen a lot of behaviour of people suppressing biases and doing and saying what they think is right and wrong, as opposed to, acknowledging that they have those deep-seated beliefs and recognising that and realising there's nothing wrong with that. And until you're aware of it, you can't make decisions independent of it. It kind of drives you.
Very true. We all have those biases, and it's being aware of them that can help us move forward. So thank you for sharing. Next question is a great one, and I'd like to throw this one to Liana first. How do we instill a mindset early on that women should and can trust their own voice and advocate on their own behalf?
It's a good question. Yeah, very important one. I think it's the instilling that value of having confidence and confidence in your own voice from a young stage in your career, I think is really important, because often if you don't have that voice and you don't have that confidence, it can really hold you back. And even if you have all the qualifications and all of the skills and the knowledge, if you're not out there and you're not able to communicate yourself well and people aren't able to see that, then often it can hold you back in your development. So I think for me, the important element in terms of finding voice, and obviously that's a journey that I'm still on really, but it's kind of about what I found that helped me was really just spending that time in developing the technical skills and the foundation of your knowledge, like learn your craft, because I think when you understand what it is you're talking about, as you are getting out there and as you are facing people, you're presenting or you're getting asked questions, you've always got that to rely on. And so I found that that's what helps me when I have to step into a situation that I might feel is new to me, is just relying on that technical knowledge. And I think the people around you will respect you more when you know what you're saying, you know what you're talking about.
That's very true. Thanks, Liana. Kylie, would you like to give your perspective on the question, please?
Yes, I think a big part of this is really, particularly for more junior women coming through, is actually really encouraging them to have their own voice and to speak up and have a say. And I think it builds on what Liana talked about then having confidence. So if they are comfortable with the content and material, they can speak confidently. To quote Sheryl Sandberg, you need to lean in meetings. So if I give you an example, I recently had a senior associate in our firm. She'd been promoted, and she came into a meeting and she sat on the periphery of this group of people. She sat back rather than leant in, and she never offered an opinion. And she was in a position where I know she's really talented and should be looking for that next step in her career, but she didn't demonstrate that confidence or that passion or that enthusiasm. So what we can do, and in this case what I did, is took her aside and said, this is what you need to do. Sit in the middle, lean in, give your point of view, give your perspective. And that's hard at the beginning. So said to her, next time, have a chat with me. I'll sit next to you and I'll nudge you or kick you under the table and say, speak up. So that's the sort of thing we can do to help each other and look out for each other. But the key message is you're promoted because we think you're really good. So now show everyone that you're really good, because we believe in you. You just need to believe in yourself a little bit more.
That's great, Kylie. I actively seek feedback still after being in the industry for 15 years. So whether it's a presentation I've done or anything like that, I do seek feedback from peers or people that are comfortable sharing feedback, and it's building on that confidence and competency, which is really important. Thank you for sharing. There's still a continuing need worldwide for more progressive mindsets and inclusive behaviours to be forged. How do you push systemic change around ideas that are new or slow on the uptake? I would like to throw this one to Janet, please.
I want to add something to what was said before, if that's okay. So
Please do, of course.
So I love what has been said about it, but I would like to just offer a caution. So women are super confident, right? Like research says that women are confident. The issue is that when we're confident, we're more likely to experience discrimination, right? And bias. So I think that one of the things is, I think it's great that we're instilling that mindset. I think your advice is super wise, but I think we shouldn't, it shouldn't take responsibility from fixing the systemic problems, right? So I think, the examples of taking someone aside and kicking them on the table, that's awesome, because that's a systemic fix, right? That's like sponsorship in action. But I don't think we should be telling women to be more confident, because I think women are. It's just that we've all experienced, like, we're rational beings. We know that it's trickier. And so I just wanted to make that point, because I think it's actually about leaders really being alive to the situation and realizing that actually, am I hearing every voice, and, am I noticing things that shouldn't be there? In this meeting, did I ask everyone to speak? Like, I think there's things like that we need to do. I don't think that we should be relying on those without power to step forward when those who have the power can change the context. So I think that's the caution that I would give around that one. And I think on your question, a lot of this is about not fixing women. It's about, like, as you said, systemic change. I think I'm super boring, right? Because I come back to, hey, like, with every business opportunity, if I want Amazon to grow, if I want you guys to become Prime subscribers or whatever, I'm going to set a target. I'm going to have activities that I track and measure, and then I'm going to adjust based on what I learn. And I think it's the same thing with, first of all, identifying systemic barriers and removing them, right? So, if you observe that in your company, people don't come back from parental leave or don't take parental leave, you got to dig in there and figure that out. I've done a reasonable amount of work in that in companies I've been part of, and just really simple fixes like keeping in touch with people who are on leave, or encouraging people to take leave, or protecting people's jobs a lot more, because in the inquiry recent inquiry in Australia within the last 5 years showed that like 50% of women who are on parental leave, experience some kind of negative treatment. So I think that a lot of this is about identifying in your specific organization what you think you need to fix, and then actually making those changes. So, I think a lot, again, I just come back to, it's a leadership thing. So, are your most senior leaders engaged in the work? And that's why, being involved in the early days in the Champions of Change Coalition was such a privilege, because, I'd never thought about the fact that actually women alone, women had made so much progress, right, of social rights and healthcare and, getting to have mortgages, things that are unthinkable today. We've made so much progress, but when the closer we got to economic power, the stronger the forces of exclusion. And so the whole notion of getting men to step up besides women, not to speak for women, not to do the work on behalf of women, but to use their influence to create a more gender equal world, I think is something that's really powerful. And one of the reasons that I still continue to believe that creating coalitions of men and women together is the way to go.
Absolutely agree. And I find that having a development plan, or encourage to have a development plan that they can work towards and apply those systemic changes to, really does go a long way. So thank you for sharing. Jen, would you like to contribute to this question as well, please?
I guess to extend what Janet was saying, there is a real need for men to step up and be the champions, and it can't be left up to the women to always have to advocate for themselves. And there's a real opportunity to really call for action with that thought in mind, that every meeting that you're at, that you just consider that every voice is heard. And and actually listen to it, because there's been plenty of meetings that I've been in, and often the only female, and you'll say something and then there'll be a discussion for about half an hour and then someone else will say the same thing and I'll say, oh, that's a really good idea. I'm sure everyone can relate to that. So yeah, if everyone takes on the responsibility to make sure that everyone's got voices in the room and that they're heard and listened to and considered, then you'll be surprised about some of the conversations that you'll have and insights that you'll reach through those meetings as well.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very true. I'm sure a lot of people here have seen that, and it's how you deal with that that's also important. I'd like to hear from all the panelists on the next question, as I feel that it's always a great opportunity to take something away from someone's own personal experience. As a leader, what has been the most significant barrier in your career? Sandra, would you like to open with this one for us?
Yes.
Right. Now, this is a hard reflection to do because I sort of consider my career and I'm very pleased with what I've achieved, and I can't readily identify any specific turning points. But sort of when I think of what I've needed to do to get where I have, you know, it's a really big workload. And an example of that is just combining the responsibilities of home and the responsibilities of work. So I'm a mother of 3 boys. I remember having boys aged 5, 3 and 1, you know, getting up in the morning, you know, after probably being up several times during the night, hanging out loads of washing, you know, taking the youngest to childcare, taking the oldest to primary school, rushing into the office, sitting in the boardroom table. And I'm looking at all of these men thinking, who washed your underpants today? Like, you know, seriously, you know, it's like that's where the load is. You know, it's a genuine physical responsibility that women often have. My mum, you know, she's part of a different generation, and she says, you're just so lucky, Sandra, to have a husband that helps you. And I think, ooh, you know, that presumes the responsibility is mine. All of the domestic duties are mine. It's my department, and I should be grateful that he helps. Whereas I'm like, no, we're both living in the house. Everyone's got dirty underpants. So the way that you can be a champion male for change, is to really assist in domestic responsibility. You know, make sure that your women folk in the home can get to work as well. So that's the sort of systemic change I'd like to see, men doing laundry.
Let's go to Kylie next, please.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. I do think it's really important that you have a partner who shares the load, because that makes it easier. I guess for me, this was a little bit of tough self-reflection as well, because when I thought about it, I thought actually my biggest barrier has often been me and my own belief in myself. And that's been something I've had to really overcome and take some deep breaths sometimes and put myself in positions that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with. The other thing that I think was a massive turning point for me personally is there was a generational change in the leadership in our organisation, and with that came, I ended up working with a lot of men who were more my age, who had daughters, who had huge aspirations for their daughters, and they didn't have the same bias that some of the older men who used to run the organisation did. And I can see how that actually changed quite drastically, and that's when, interestingly, around the same time we had a massive focus on just gender equality in the organisation as a whole. So I do think there's some generational aspects to that have helped switch for us, and probably society as well.
Absolutely. And I think often, specifically with my husband, you know, they want to be told when you need help, you know. I often think that they should know that the bin needs taking out, but they don't. So just ask them. It's okay. Jen, can we hear from you next, please?
Yeah, so reflecting, I think similar to what Kylie said, that probably the biggest barrier has been myself and belief in myself. But I spent a number of years, especially in the first part of my career, conforming and being one of the boys, because it was even more rare than it is today for someone to be in engineering and graduate and work on construction sites. And so I just thought that I needed in that environment to be just like the boys. And as I progressed through my career, I think the biggest eye-opener as I got a bit more senior in my leadership roles was that it wasn't okay for me to have those same masculine traits in my leadership style as my fellow male colleagues. And it caught me by surprise. And so that was a real learning curve for myself. But the blessing was it meant that I could stop living two lives, because I went to work and I was like the general at work, and then I'd be out social with my friends and lead a totally different lifestyle and enjoy putting a dress on and things like that. So the turning point I found was actually rewarding for me. I could actually take my whole self to work, and it was okay to be a girl in that environment.
Yes, certainly a lot more accepting maybe than it was when you started. So that is great. Janet, Liana, would you like to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, I think some of the stuff that Jen said there just kind of resonated with me a little bit. Obviously, I'm in a similar kind of industry and that have come through maybe a bit later. I think I've always been really fortunate to have had a lot of support, and I'm not just saying that because this is an NDY event, but I'm paid to be here. But I guess I think I've had a lot of that, and I've had a lot of the people that have kind of supported me along the way, and like we were saying, the sponsorship of advocating and putting your name forward and giving you those opportunities. But like some of the others have said, it's the self-doubt that I think always has kind of pulled me back a little bit, where you just sometimes don't feel like you have that confidence to say what you want to say, or the opinion that you have. So I think a lot of that was probably the bigger barrier that I kind of felt. And also just having the influence of, especially when you're starting out, the bigger voices, it's the loud voices and the dominant and talkative people around you that you tend to kind of look at and you think that's what it is to be successful. You have to be like that. But I think I found a lot more confidence in just being more myself. I'm more of a quietly confident person, a little bit more reserved. So I tried to find confidence in just being that version of myself, and finding that, you can still be successful and you can still get people to trust what you're saying and respect you, even if you're not always the loudest one or the most talkative one.
Thank you for sharing. Yes, that's very true. Stay true to yourself. Janet, I'd like to hear from you next, please.
I've really loved hearing from the other panelists. I was reflecting that I think one of the things that's been a barrier has been the good mother belief. So that whole notion, like the good mother belief, is that good mothers are with their children, right? And if you're not with your children, you're probably not a good mother. You can actually be with them and, ignoring them or whatever, but if you're with them, you could be a terrible mother, but good mothers are with their children. And I think that I probably, I worked part-time for a long time, and that was great, but I probably didn't need to work part-time. I could have taken more risks, but it was really important to me to be perceived as a good mother. And I think that was so foolish, because I think, I've always tried to be a good mother. Nothing, would have changed if I just, I don't know who I was trying to be good for. So I think that's one of the beliefs that I think a lot about. It was actually funny. My parents came to visit me after 2.5 years, and it was just such a joy to have them from Canada. They stayed with me for almost a month. And it was really funny because I was getting up early in the morning on purpose so I could do a couple hours of work, and then my dad would get up early and I would just sit with him. He's quite elderly. He's slowing down. And then I would, go back to work a bit and, have lunch with them. And I thought I was like being the most flexible, like, ducks underwater. Like, I thought I was so calm and being cool. And my mom said to me, and then I would stop at 5 and have dinner with them and watch a TV show and play a game maybe, and then I would sneak and do a bit of work at night to kind of catch up, right? And my mom said, wow, Janet, you really work a lot. And I was like, wow, like, and because her reference point, and my parents have always been super supportive, but her reference point was very much, you know, like a very different lifestyle with very hard boundaries. And it's funny, right? Because my mom thinks I'm awesome, right? But in my heart, I'm scared that my mom doesn't like me, right? Like, again, you know, but it's really, you know, I hope you can see it's a metaphor, right? For, you know, what does it mean to be a good mother? It means that you really strive to do well at home. I think that's a really big barrier for a bunch of us when it probably doesn't need to be.
Thank you for sharing. That's really true. We're often our own worst enemies. As a mentor and a mom of 2 young girls, I always find this a very valuable question. What advice would you give to the next generation, those women coming up behind you? Maybe share a bit about what you've learned from your experience, and what would you maybe have done differently? We'll start with you, Kylie, please.
Advocate for yourself. You know, put your hand up if you want something. Take every opportunity you can to learn and be part of something. Don't wait to be asked. I think people love to see enthusiasm and people who are interested in things. So don't be a passenger. Just throw yourself out there. Put your hand up. Pick me. I'd really like to be a part of that, and then fight for your corner if you need to. But I don't think you'd need to fight if you showed that level of enthusiasm and commitment, because people will go, oh, you're interesting. Be a part of my project. Come on in. So that's my tip.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Sandra?
Yeah, another tricky one, because it's, you know, some of the things that's worked for me personally is just, you know, having that courage to give yourself a little push. And sometimes it can be a little terrifying to, you know, put a highlight on yourself, and it's easier to sort of say nothing or be quiet. But if ever I need to, I just sort of visualize someone with their hand behind your back and giving yourself a little shove. It's a little mental thing to say, come on, you know, you can do it, push yourself forward. I've definitely used that technique. The other thing is just, you know, query about the sort of society we have and the way that we give deference to power. And, you know, I think a lot of the commentary about our Australian of the Year, Grace Tame, is about, you know, to what extent do we all defer to power, that, you know, it really leads to that power being used for ill purposes, and how do we challenge it? And one of the little challenges that I always think is, don't just presume because the men are in the room, they're the important ones. And, you know, I hope nobody does anymore, but definitely when I was growing up, I was taught what the men had to say was important. And then I, you know, had brothers and I went to co-ed schools, and I realised men are not that special. You know, they're not more important than you. So just be conscious. If you're in a room and you're not, you know, you're being a bit quiet because you think someone else is far more important, just query yourself and pick up that bias of your own, I think.
That's great. Thank you for that insight, Sandra. Jen, would you like to share next, please?
Yeah, all great advice so far, and I hope my daughter's listening intently. I guess it's along the same themes. It's really back yourself and be brave and be yourself. Most importantly, it's probably been the biggest lesson that I've learned. Be true to your own values and comfortable in your own skin of who you are. And yeah, that's really it.
Thank you. Janet?
Well, I make it a habit not to give advice to young people, because I think they've got a lot to teach me. But if I had to, I think I would say to believe in abundance and not in scarcity. And I think that's such a powerful thing to do, to just think, you know, the world is very open, and if you don't like where you're working, don't work there. You know, if you don't think you're spending your time doing important work, don't do it. And I don't mean that in irresponsible, like, and especially the Amazonians, don't go quit tomorrow, please, but, talk to me first. But look, actually, I mean it in a kind of, just believe that you have the power to influence your own destiny. There's never been a better time to be a worker in Australia, right? Like, there is a talent shortage. So make sure the work you're doing is meaningful and believe that if you don't like what you're doing, there's other things. I'd also, by the way, say stay in your job for at least a couple of years. That's the flip side of it, right? Because that's where you learn. But I see far too many people who work in jobs they don't love. And I don't know why they do that, actually, genuinely. Not when you're young.
Life's too short. Not when you're young. Thank you, Janet. Liana, would you like to share with us?
Yeah, it's always hard going last, right? When everyone takes all the good answers. No, a lot of great things said there, and I'll pick something different. I think for me, one of the other things that I learned and what I love to see in some of the up and coming engineers that are coming through our business is, take ownership of the things that you get given. Even if you get given the smallest of tasks to do, I think taking ownership of things and really seeing them through, being responsible for them, I think it just really shows a lot about your character when you do that, and it can be sometimes the smallest of tasks that you can be asked to do. But I think that shows a lot, and I think it will get a lot of respect from the people around you when you show that you're willing to go to the limit to get things over the line.
Thank you for sharing. We're a little bit ahead of time, but I think there's already a few questions that's popped up on Slido. For those of you who may have any questions and you want to pop them in there, please do so. I'll ask a few more questions, and they're not necessarily addressed to a specific panelist. So let's make this one interactive. I'd like to hear from all of you. First question from Lee. What incentives help companies to stand out in attracting and retaining women in underrepresented industries? There needs to be a large pool to pull talent from. So very good question. We obviously see a lot of incentives that different companies roll out, and there's a lot of similarities across the board. But it would be great to hear from the panelists on what they think would really attract and also retain people. Let's go to Sandra first.
All right. Look, I'm not quite sure incentives. I think the Property Council's experience is that it's attraction that's needed to the property industry, and that's about a growing awareness, that we are a really strong career path for young women. So to do that, to attract people, we've had our Girls in Property program going for a number of years where we take Year 9 girls. That might seem young, but that's actually when students start thinking about what they're going to be doing in upper school and making subject selections. So we take them on a day where they experience every aspect of the property industry. We have 500 Women in Property, which is a program that supports young executives in the property industry to get some wider support to go and observe a committee, meet with someone for a coffee who's going to give them some assistance, and start to get involved in their industry body, which creates opportunities for them. So I think for the industry we're in, it's probably more attraction initiatives rather than incentives.
I must admit, when I was on the diversity committee, it's probably now 4 years ago when you did the first Girls in Property in Perth. So I was part of that, and that was an amazing day. I think we had 60 girls from Shenton Park, and we just took them around to some completed projects in Perth. We showed them around, and we also talked to them about the vast options in construction. It's not just engineers or architects or builders. There's many different facets. So if you're good at the finances, there's financial pathways that you can take within construction. There's so many. I think there's at least at Curtin University we talked about 100 different careers at least within the construction industry, and that opened up their eyes quite a bit, because when you hear construction you think you either need to get on the tools or be an engineer or be good at a specific subject, where there's so many different things that you can explore. So that's really great. Kylie, might go over to you to hear from you.
Sure. I think it's really interesting to me. The more the recruitment we're doing now, the young women are asking a lot more about how many women have we got in leadership? What's your parental leave policy? What's your flexible work policy? And these are young graduates who are very quick to say, I'm not about to have a baby, but I still want to know what they are because I'm making a decision and I'd like to be here a long time. So, we've introduced a really a generous parental leave policy, 26 months paid parental leave. We really, as I said, it helped us focus on getting our leadership numbers right. And the flip side for our organisation is we can hire some really great talent. They actually want to come here. And as we're about to hit this massive war for talent, that becomes more and more important. So addressing those concerns becomes vital for any organisation. And you'll get to understand what they are through the candidates. And the other thing we do a lot is we actually ask our junior staff, what else could we do? How else can we get these? We go out and find out what the fit thinking is at the university about why they would or wouldn't come to us. So all of that stuff is really, really important.
Right. I do agree. Thank you, Kylie. Jen, over to you.
Well, construction is obviously very underrepresented by women, and we, as you mentioned, we have a perception issue of what the construction industry is and what it's predominantly made up of, and what sort of characteristics or skills you need to get into the industry. And I've been saying a lot lately that it's the worst, best kept secret is how rewarding a career is in the construction industry. There's such a huge variety. There's so many different paths you can take. People who are even, I've found out recently, people who are even studying construction management, and I guess I was the same, studying engineering, had no idea what the opportunities were and the positive side and the ability to build a full career in the construction or property industry. And I think we just need to get it out there, and so that people outside of our industry are not taking the standard paths of entry, actually see it as a great career choice and an opportunity for longevity and to do very many different things, make a difference in society, contribute to the environment. Like, there's so many aspects of it, and it's all things that people are really driven by these days, but often the last thing that is thought of as an opportunity for them.
Yes, that's great. I do think that through the initiatives like the Girls in Property, and even just going into schools, we do that often. We go and talk to schools about engineering, and it's just sharing knowledge and bringing people's attention to what opportunities are out there. That's really important. I won't leave you for last this time, Liana. I'll let you go next, please.
Yeah, look, I think when we talk about retention, or I guess attracting women into the industry or into our organisations, I think it's just really about showing that there is a career path. And some of it, like some of the others have said before, it is about seeing examples of success stories, because it shows you a perspective of what you can be and where you can go. But I think also it's just about showing that there is, the training, and there is those opportunities, and there's the variety to get involved in things, because I think most people get really excited about hearing about all the great things, just like Jen was saying, all the great things that you can be involved in. So I think it's really about demonstrating that variety and those opportunities and where you can go. So, yeah.
Agree. Thank you, Liana. Janet, over to you, please.
Yeah, I really agree with what you're saying, Liana. I think, and I don't have that much to add, I think we're still learning at Amazon how to recruit in Australia. Not that many people know us, and they know Amazon Web Services. And of course, the tech industry also has historical challenges around representation with the degree programs they've come from. So I don't pretend to have all the answers. And in fact, I'm really happy to see a lot of the leaders, Rachel's here, others, who actually are trying to solve that problem, right? How do we make sure that our employment value proposition is strong? But I would also say, like, at its core, I think people's enjoyment of work comes down to, is their work value? Do they have a career path? But also who their direct manager is. So I think so much of the time it's just about having really good people managers. And that can be really tricky, because sometimes the folks that are good at some things aren't great at people management. And so one of the things that I've done across my career is just focus on making sure I had really good people leaders, because I think they then create their own followership. And that's like, you know, the proof is in the pudding. If it's a good place to work, if you're a good manager, you're going to tell your friends, and you're going to be a better recruiter than if you're, you know, if you've got less to work with.
Word of mouth, very important in all sorts of facets. I'll go to the next question. What goes through your mind when you think of the women who came before you, those women who began to pave the way? So this is quite a broad question, but maybe just talk about what your thoughts are around that. And I will start with Jen, please.
Great. I know that there's women out there that paved the way before me, but I feel like I've been in the industry forever, and it took a long time to meet other women. And there were obviously the women that I went through uni with and started working with, but they then soon left the industry, and I stuck on. And but I do. I have no doubt that it would have been harder for anyone before us, and tougher, and so I thank them for that, because even though there wasn't a lot of change at the time that I entered the industry, there was definitely some acceptance for women, even if it was sort of a novelty just to have women on site. But there was definitely some acceptance of it, so that there was some work that had been done, and I'm grateful for that. And I often think about that for myself as well, that, you know, on those days where you feel like you haven't got enough to keep fighting and to stand strong, I just reflect and think about being an example, and for every bit of effort that I put in to make change now is going to benefit someone else for the future, including my daughters, and but for anyone else progressing through the industry. So that's the thing that keeps me going, really, is just to think of that.
Great, thank you. Kylie, would you like to share as well?
Sure. I guess when I look back, and I think back to Kate Shepherd, or, you know, how many years you go back, but even the woman who was the only woman in the university lecture hall with all the men, I mean, I just think what bravery and courage they had to do that. Like you, Jen, I often will walk into a room, and I got really good at math for a while, of being able to work out what percentage of women were in a room sometimes at some senior meetings, and you go, wow. Imagine if you know, it can be quite intimidating sometimes. So I think, yeah, I just think they must be so brave. And I always feel that for some women, they might worry that they were a token, or that they were there for the wrong reasons. And I think that they actually have really important roles to play as well. I don't know about Australia, but I can say in New Zealand that there's still a massive underrepresentation of women on boards, and there's no targets for those. But I am actually, as I get older, I've become a believer in positive discrimination, and actually making sure there are roles for women in some of these, because you don't get change unless you've got role models, and other younger women can look and go, I can do that too, or I believe I'm capable of that. And likewise with boards, there's a lot of research with McKinsey's about you need at least a third of your board to be women to actually affect change that's ongoing. And so the challenge for a lot of the men out there, and particularly men on boards or in senior leadership roles where they're talking about the SLT or the ELT, is to make sure they've got that third of that team as women, so that they actually develop and get that focus, that different perspective, and then once you have that, I promise you it starts coming through, and more women start putting their hand up because they can see themselves sitting at that table. So there's still some work to be done, but I'm very confident we will get there.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. There's a really good question here that I'd like to throw out to the panel. How do we break the bias for men to be more involved, taking parental leave, doing daycare pickups, etc.? My husband feels discriminated against when he does. So that was a question posted. So let's maybe throw this one out to Janet. if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, not at all. I think it's super tricky, right? But I think it's the opportunity that we wish that men would take up, right? I do think that we can all, I try to be very encouraging, and I try to set an expectation that people will take their parental leave, for example. And I think you can do that quite loudly and quite proudly, and you can correct people who might say by mistake that it's a hassle that they're going on leave, and do they really need to take it? You know, those are things that that it can be quite overt, that we can all take a role in correcting. I also think too that we can help the men in our lives within our sphere of influence to, we can actually challenge them directly and suggest to them what joy there can be in getting involved in things that they might not naturally know. And I think we can play an incredibly important role in encouraging them. Just in the same way that we want all of our leaders to encourage women to step forward. I think it's very much the same idea of anytime there's a bias, you kind of have to work bit by bit to dismantle it. And a lot of that comes down to, hand-to-hand combat, really. You need good policies and practices, but I think most Australian organizations have decent policies and practices about making sure that they're taken up and without fear of reprisal, right?
Correct. And if we look at the second part of the question where the person is saying that their husband feels discriminated against when he does do this. So again, maybe starts at the workplace, encouraging dads to also feel empowered to do the school pickups and drop-offs, and that it's okay across the board. I know within Perth, we've had a few male team members who have either gone to a 9-day fortnight, so a permanent temporary arrangement, but it doesn't need to be that. It can just be having that flexibility to be part of picking the kids up or taking the kids to the doctor or whatever the case may be. But I think we've come a long way. Certainly, from what I have seen anyway in the industry, it's not really frowned upon. I don't really see it being frowned upon. There might be exceptions out there, but it's certainly becoming the new normal.
I think I was kind of joking, but I was kind of serious. I think we can play a role in teaching them the tricks, but also, I used to, I don't know if any of you have done this, but I used to, has my boss left? Okay, great, I'm leaving. I'd say to my husband, I think I can do pickup, but I need to make sure he's gone first, right? And I'm not proud of those things at all, right? That's terrible. Why would you do that? That's so dumb. You should be hey, I'm going to pick my kid up, but somehow, we have all these fears. And so I think that there's something that we can do to loudly proclaim that we ourselves are going to do those things so it becomes safe for others to do it. There's a safety in numbers. So, the trick of leaving your coat on the chair, I bet we could all come up with a list of things we've done to not be detected. And how ridiculous is that? We should just all be saying, I'm leaving now because I've got something that's really important to me and I've done my work. So, all good.
That is a significant cultural change and a big challenge to, Stuart, Arif, you guys need to be actually going, I'm coaching my kids' football team, I'm off, see ya. And it's the loud and proud thing. Make it really visible, and that will affect that cultural change.
Agree.
It's got to start at
yes,
the
couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I agree.
Would anyone else on the panel like to?
I was just going to say that I agree. It's about celebrating the successes of people taking extended leave. I've noticed that it is becoming more and more common and accepted, and that actually helps for future women as well, future females coming up through the ranks, the leaders, because it's a real stumbling block for women to think about having to take time out for having children and what impact is that going to have on their career. And a lot of us think that you make a choice of either having a family or having a career, and we have our, those biases or beliefs that make us think that you have to choose one or the other. But the more that we can celebrate it and encourage it and have and make it okay for men to take that time out, then the better it is going to be for all.
Absolutely. Should be the new normal for all. I'll move on to another question we received via the app. Any tips for when you find yourself having imposter syndrome? That's a really good one. Liana, do you maybe want to kick this one off?
Now we'll tell us the last one. Look, I think in some ways there's probably a personal thing where it comes to checking in with yourself and making sure that you aren't becoming necessarily the environment around you and that you are true to yourself. But maybe there is a bit of ownership that we need to do that for each other sometimes, and keep an eye on each other and how we are behaving and being influenced by the environments we're in, so that we don't change who we are just to fit into those environments and act a certain way just because we think that that's what we need to do to be successful.
Great advice. Thank you, Liana.
So I have a secret. Yeah, I have a secret venting partner. She lives in San Francisco, and I probably talk to her twice a week, and maybe once a week, and she does the same for me. And and I of course do it in a confidential manner and don't disclose any specifics of the situation. But if I'm feeling uncomfortable, I have a phone a friend, and we don't talk about work all that much. We're talking, we're great friends in general. But if I'm feeling uncomfortable with something. She's an excellent listener, and she'll often, set me straight, right? I also am conscious that, I do think it's just about really checking in with, if I'm feeling that way, what's the root cause of it, and what can I do about that? Is it because I don't know the answer? Is it because I haven't done enough work? Is it because I just feel that I don't have the right support around me? What's the root cause of that imposter syndrome? And then what can I do to address that? Because, it actually might be that I'm an imposter, right? It's possible that I'm feeling that way because actually I'm in need of help, right? But I think and that's healthy. I actually think it's a good identification to feel that insecurity when you're not the right decision maker or if you need to get more advice. But I think it's being able to split that up from just the truly imposter part of it, which you can, with some good friends, I think you can actually dismiss it quite effectively.
Absolutely. There's a few more questions, if no one else wants to address the previous one. No, we already had that one. If you could only do one thing to move the dial for women in the workplace, what would your one thing be? Sandra, can I throw that one to you?
Yeah, look, I think it probably goes back to that domestic balance. I think women would participate so much more if society didn't expect that they were going to be the ones responsible for child rearing, child caring, and for cleaning, basically. It distresses me when I see Facebook posts and women say, oh, it's not worth me going back to work because the childcare fees mean that, it's not going to be financially viable. And I think, well, why are you only putting the childcare fees against your own salary? Your husband as well. You should be able to amortize that cost amongst both of you participating in the workplace. So I agree. I'm quite positive about men taking parental leave. I'm seeing it more and more. And I will tell you what, they're about to discover the secret, which is it's really enjoyable. And it's great. It's great hanging out with toddlers. It's great going to the playground, buying a cappuccino, sitting on the grass on a summer's day. It is a great gig. And what I think is going to happen is that men who do it are going to enjoy it. They're going to go to the pub and they're going to tell their mates. They're going to this is a sweet gig. I reckon it's going to take off. I really do. And that's going to be a magical difference.
Great. I saw a few heads being shook in the audience here, but I think that the balance between the two caregivers is what's key. So you can have your day care, your mom days and your dad days. and that way there's not an overload of one or the other. And maybe we all need daycares at our workplaces. Hint, hint. Kylie, would you like to offer some insights on
one thing
what
to
the
move
one
the
thing would be
dial?
for you? Yes, please.
I think if every industry had targets they had to achieve and they were measured and their success was determined based on that, and I think that would, and it was published and talked about really openly, I think that would address a lot of it. I also think a lot of organisations struggle to know the tangibles to do. Everyone talks about the problem, but no one actually can say, have you thought about these things? And so sharing these ideas, so, you know, big ups to NDY for doing this, because actually just sharing the ideas and is really powerful. And, you know, my details are on our website, so if someone ever wanted to ring and say, hey, can you talk me through how you did X, I would be very, very happy to help. So, but yes, targets I think are really important.
Great, thank you. Jen, do you have one thing that you'd like to contribute?
Yes, I agree with Kylie. Targets are really important. We now have targets for government work, and at Built we also have targets for female representation at all levels. And so my one thing that I think will help create momentum, and I think Kylie's had the experience of this already at her firm, is we need more women in decision-making roles. That's the one thing that I keep pushing for, because if you've got that mindset and you've got the perspective of a female, or even if we just call it a different perspective, the decisions will be influenced by that, and that's what's really going to make a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, my husband is also an electrical engineer, and he actually enjoys going to work when there is females around, because it just adds that different perspective in the office. It's diverse. There's different ideas that are bouncing around, and we actually complement each other. So I really think most people enjoy that and want more of that. So that is great. Anyone else wanted to add to that question? So I think we've run out of questions. All good.
Look, I'll add. I actually think this is one of these things that
Thank you.
to scale. I think if we all thought about our sphere of influence and thought about our organizations and our own lives, and if we decided, all of us, both men and women together, to take tangible steps to make a difference, and we would, and ask others to do the same, I think we've made tremendous. I think we are making tremendous progress, and we would make more. One of my mentors is a woman called Diane Grady, who's on a number of boards in Australia, and she has been instrumental in my own success. And I was listening to a podcast where she was interviewed actually quite recently, and I was reminded that, so she had worked at McKinsey, which is a place I worked at for many years, the global consultancy, and she was one of the only women partners in the Australian office for a long time, and she didn't see anybody coming behind her. And she left to go do other things, including building an amazing board career. And she made two commitments when she left McKinsey. One was that she would, in her life, make it her task to help women be more successful. She'd do everything in her power, in her sphere of influence, to make women more successful. And the second thing that she said is that any organization she was involved in, and she's on the board of Macquarie, she was on Woolworths for 14 years. I'm probably missing a few that I should know. And she said, I will make things better for people in general. And she's done that now for like 20 years. And I don't think I would be in the place in my career if it hadn't been for Diane's advice and mentorship. And I know she's done that for literally dozens of women that I know in corporate Australia. And if that's just, what one person can do, gosh, I hope that when I'm, Diane's a little older than me, I hope that when I'm her age that I can say the same. And I hope you all, when you're her age, could say the same as well.
Thank you for sharing. I have a couple more questions that have just popped up, which will probably see us through nicely. Do businesses see value in attracting more senior in age women to join their workforce? There seems to be a large gap in encouraging an older age bracket. Maybe if we throw to you, Kylie, first, if you don't mind.
Look, yes, I think is the answer. I just think the whole concept of diverse thinking and different ideas and different perspective is vital in any project team, in any business, to really capture your market. I mean, we're all in different industries. I am anyway, and you're dealing with people, and your customers are senior women or older women in some organisations. You have to be able to talk to all of them, and I just think diversity of thought is vital. And the most successful projects I've ever been in is where we've got a range of people around the table and really thrashed out ideas. So yes, I think absolutely. And as I hit that age, of course, I think.
No, I agree holistically. I think that's part of the whole diversity approach. Would you agree, Sandra?
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenging observation. I think it's true. You don't see a lot of older women in the workforce, and I do wonder why that is. I'm afraid I don't have any answers, but it's a challenge for all of us to think about. Yeah, very interesting.
Thank you for posting the question. Last question for the day. Many of you have spoken about self-doubt as a barrier for you. How much of this do you believe stems from the lack of female representation on leadership roles? Jen, I might throw to you, please.
Yeah, okay. I think a bit of it stems from not having the example before you. Like there's I'm sure everyone's aware that people have a belief that you can't be what you can't see, or it's very hard to believe that you can be something that you can't see. So not having that representation or the absence of it would definitely add to the self-doubt. I was also, and I guess it's sort of tied into the imposter syndrome perspective. It's a fleeting thought often, or it's a moment in time where you have those self-doubts, which is, really what the imposter syndrome is. And I was talking to one of our board members, and she said, "Oh, everyone's got imposter syndrome." And I was surprised, and I asked her if she did as well. And she's like, of course, everyone has moments of imposter syndrome. But what my observation has been is that women seem to pay attention to it more. Whereas, I've no doubt that guys have those fleeting thoughts and moments as well, but they are just that, fleeting thoughts and moments, and they just then get on with it. It's an interesting phenomenon.
Agree. We're wired differently. Definitely agree with that one.
Yeah, I think so. I think
part of it,
Self-doubt is just part of the human condition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But don't you think, though, we're treading around something, perhaps, right? Don't you think it's also the case that we've seen women who have been, there's a lack of women who've been successful, but we've probably all seen women who haven't been successful as well, right? And because of systemic barriers. So I think that's part of what we internalize that. Like, 5-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds can tell you, the role of women and how it's different than the role of men, right? So we're, it's everywhere. So I think that, I don't think, I think for me, it's not the lack of a role model. It's the fact that clearly it's harder for women to be in leadership. I think that is perhaps a simpler answer, right? So I think we're almost looking at the output of the system is that there's fewer women in leadership, but I don't like the input into that is that we have a system that puts more barriers in women's way a lot of the time. And I'm not talking about like a big system like companies or government. I'm talking about our culture that tells us from a very young age what we're expected to do, which often aren't compatible with what it takes to be a leader. So I think for me, it's much less about like I didn't have a role model. It's much more like not having a role model meant that it was going to be more difficult.
Yeah.
If I could talk about a success the Property Council has had is in changing the composition of our panels to
ensure that they are 40-40-20 in their representation, with the 20 being discretionary. It's amazing how hard this is, right? Because it's a very natural thing to do, to say, okay, we've got this great event coming up. Who should speak? And we go, John, Peter, Kevin, yep, they're great speakers. And then you go, oh, gosh, we've got to think of some, talented women for this panel. And it's harder work, but you always succeed. You always find a really outstanding female speaker to be on the panel who is incredibly well qualified, but just not well known. So the systemic change, which is, it's just easier to go with the bias, which is the people we know and the blokes that have got the status. It's that harder bit of work, but I think it's really worthwhile because it certainly changed the face of property industry events to the extent now, we see some other industry bodies, they'll put together a panel that's all men and you think, God, that's weird, and it really stands out as being strange. So I think slowly, all these little systemic changes can really change that culture that Janet spoke about.
Very true. It is unusual to just see an all-male panel.
It's good.
Absolutely. That was a really great discussion, everyone. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. And thank you for everyone here in Perth who is here in person. It's been great to see you, or half of your faces. I'd like to conclude our online event now, and the live stream will be made available for viewing and for sharing at a later date. So please look out for those as we share it. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today here. It has been great, and we need to continue having these discussions in all forums and hopefully hear more from our male counterparts as well, because they'll have some great ideas. They love having us around and we love being around them. So it's been great. Thank you all so much for making time in your busy schedules.